Hello there, everybody. I am the CHALL, your sporting journalist. Today we've got a massive video. It's the rebuild of Utah Jazz. We're looking at the past, the present, and the future. What needs to happen, what needs to be changed, and also what has been changed already during the off-season as we head into the end of the preseason camp and get closer and closer to the start of the regular season. And to help me with this discussion today, we've got Eric Pincus of the Bleacher Report. Eric, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it very much.
Nice. It's a pleasure having you on the show, mate. So let's just start off then going, obviously, with the rebuild, we have to look at where they've come from. So let's have a look at last season. So starting off with the roster from last season. So of course, starting off, we've got the front court of Conway, Mitchell, and Bogdanovich, and the back court of O'Neal and Gobert. You've also got key reserve players like Alexander Walker. You've also got Clarkson. You've got Butler. You've also got Rudy Gay. You've also got players like Hernan Gomez, you've got Paschal, and you've also got Whiteside, who's now a free agent as well. So when you look at last season, Eric, what did the Utah Jazz do right? What did the Utah Jazz do wrong?
Well, I guess, I mean, it's hard to put in a specific, like a simple sentence other than to say they went all in on what they had like they were a championship contender. And they never got past the second round, but they were close one or two times. And going after Conley, I think ultimately giving up the resources to get him was the mistake. I think they got Conley after his prime, well after his prime. If they'd gotten the Memphis Grizzlies defensive-minded, still capable scorer, he shot really well, at least in the regular season. But I just think ultimately they invested in a very defensive lacking roster where too much was put on Rudy Gobert. The only other really quality defender you had was Royce O'Neal, and he's short. And when I say short, I mean I'm 5'7", so the guy's 6'4". He's obviously not short, but what was asked of him, if you're going to have him guard power wings, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, LeBron James, he's short for those particular guys. Those guys are 6'6" to 6'9", 6'8", but also very big and strong. And so it was too much to ask, because in the backcourt you've got a smallish, older Conley. Donovan Mitchell, who's a fantastic scorer, is not a fantastic defender, also undersized, about 6'1" roughly. And then Bogdanovich is certainly a capable team defender in a concept. He can run your scheme, but he's not a good individual defender. So you just, Rudy Gay's past his prime. Alexander Walker's too young. You start going through it. Clarkson has always been a gunner, like a scorer, but not a primary defender. And so in the process, they traded away basically all of their picks that they could. They had no one under 30 other than Mitchell and O'Neal of note, unless you want to count Alexander Walker, who was not really a regular rotation guy. So you're older, you're kind of slow, you don't defend well, you're relying on one guy to carry the defense. You have no picks. All your contracts are bloated. Conley, Bogdanovich, all these guys are around the 20 mark. Clarkson's probably the cheapest in the 13 million range, but still, they had reached a point where they weren't going to go any further. I think Quinn Snyder recognized that, Gobert, Donovan, they're not on the same page. For whatever reason, Donovan doesn't trust Gobert offensively, so he's not getting him the ball. And then Gobert doesn't, rightfully so, trust his roster defensively. So it was a dead end. The first domino to fall was Quinn to say, all right, I see where this is going. I'm out of here. Danny Ainge, who took over really in the ear of ownership, along with Zanuck, who's the GM, who's the man on the ground, doing all the moves, making all the calls, with the advice of Danny Ainge in his ear, certainly. I'm not sure exactly how the dynamic works, but Zanuck's the one making the actual calls, the actual trades, talking to agents and other GMs. They went and sold out their best players to the highest bidders and got very impressive haul for that rebuild. So what went wrong was basically they went all in on a roster that wasn't good enough. And it's okay. I mean, they did really well. They had a nice sustained run. But ultimately they wisely recognized they were at the end of that run, and they got out, if anything, half a season or a season too late. But still, getting out too early, I think, is usually the way to go. That's what I recommend when I give advice. Better to get out too early than too late.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, obviously, one of the big sort of stars that were amongst that roster was Donovan Mitchell. Obviously, he's now been traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers. And, Ramona Shelburne mentioned that the Jazz have deals lined up for Mike Conley, Bogdanovich, and Clarkson as well. So, the way the Jazz traded away their two All-Stars, Mitchell and Gobert, and then Royce O'Neal, and then getting this whole array of stockpile of draft picks. I mean, does this really give you an idea as to what the future direction is now for the Utah Jazz?
Well, some teams have beaches. Utah does not have a beach. I mean, some have, the what Hollywood has to offer, what Silicon Valley up north in Golden State has to offer, what New York has to offer, what Miami has to offer. Like, there are certain places in the NBA that are destinations. Now, if you're a winning franchise, like when Cleveland was winning, players wanted to go and join LeBron. Without Cleveland, without LeBron, Cleveland is not a top destination. Utah's never been a primary destination for free agents, and so self-awareness is, a vital thing, and it's sometimes very rare in the NBA for teams to fully recognize who they are. I think the Utah Jazz understand who they are. They're a team that they have to build through the draft, and they have to build through trade. And so you say, well, how did they get to their last run? It was Mitchell through the draft, Gobert through the draft. Gobert was a late pick, a great pick. O'Neal was a nice get. You start going through. Conley was an attempt via trade. Rudy Gay was a free agent, but you got him at the end of his career. So, the main point is yeah, free agents will go to Utah, but you're probably not going to get the top tier guys. So if that's the case, just going to get cap room isn't enough, because yes, you might be able to leverage that into, like in this particular case, Sexton, he's a free agent who came to Utah, but he was also in a situation where he had nowhere else to go. Not to insult the Jazz at all, but he had reached a point as a restricted free agent. Usually every year there's one restricted free agent who can't find a home. Last year it was Lauri Markkanen, and Cleveland said, all right, we'll sign you, in my opinion, with the idea of trading him later, at which point they have. And that's that. Again, you got a good player in Markkanen if you're the Jazz via trade. So they understand, I think, who they are. They need to stockpile draft picks for two different reasons. When you go into the lottery, the odds of getting the right pick, maybe that's number one, maybe that's top five, who knows, each draft is different.
Yeah.
That you get the right player, and that even when you get the right player, for instance, if Chet Holmgren was the right player, he's going to miss his whole rookie year because of injury, right? There is a long list of players who were, quote, the right pick. Greg Oden. I mean, we can go, back far enough to, Michael Jordan didn't go first, right? So,
Yeah.
there are cases where you make the right call, or maybe it's you get the number one pick in a draft where there's just not that much talent. This next year is a very strong draft at the top. You have Victor Wembanyama. I'm not saying that right, but whatever. And then there's a whole bunch of other guys, and I'm not going to list them right now. And the draft isn't my specialty, but I talk to people, and they're very high on this. Talk to people around the league. They're very high, scouts, executives, other agents, very high on the draft class. So the 2 points that the Jazz have going for them now is that, number one, they have multiple picks, so that they'll have multiple bites at the apple. Or the other thing is you can trade. You can trade those picks for value, and that's really what's interesting. They're not ready yet to cash out those picks, but when the time comes where they've gotten a few good cornerstone pieces through the draft, and now they're going somewhere, now you could say, all right, let's trade out 29 Minnesota, 29 Cleveland, and get a player equivalent to a Donovan Mitchell or Rudy Gobert at that point. So I think they're set up really well for the long term. And the last point is it's a lot easier to tear down a team than it is to build it back up, right? They did a great job tearing it down. Now they're on the clock, and they've got some time, and it might take 2-3 years, might take longer, but this is the difficult part. What comes next?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, looking ahead to the future, the three sort of major stars as part of the brand new roster for the Utah Jazz going into the new season was what I wanted to focus on today. Colin Sexton, Lasse Markkanen, and also Ochai Agbaji as well. Sexton averaged 24.3 points per game in that 2020-2021 season, his last fully healthy season. Markkanen averaging 14.8 points last season, and obviously he's absolutely tearing it up in the Eurobasket this summer. And Agbaji, 14th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft. He won the MVP award in the NCAA tournament. I mean, are these the three stars we're looking at that Utah Jazz are going to build around, or they could be the next foundation building block for what's to come in a few years after that?
Right. I mean, it's a wait and see approach. Like, see what you have there. You can argue the difference between Mitchell to Sexton may not be all the picks that the Jazz got. I don't know if Sexton, coming off injury, Sexton is a question mark. We don't know if he's the same guy he was, but he's basically a high volume scorer who isn't, I'd say he's arguably a better defender than Mitchell, but maybe not much of a better defender. And that's just the eye test. I haven't looked at any numbers or analytics that's just going off of my gut. But neither is known for being a defender. Markkanen is a really nice player. What a guy does overseas, you can only take it only means so much. But I do think he's a very talented player. He struggled to stay healthy throughout his career, but if he's healthy, I think he's really a nice piece. Agbaji, nice prospect. You don't know what he's going to be. I mean, it's like it's a draft pick. They got an extra draft pick in that player, which is excellent to get. They also got Walker Kessler, another prospect. So these are guys who could be cornerstone pieces. When you get a prospect, you have no idea. I mean, you have an idea, but you don't really know. And so now's the time to find out. And not to judge them off of 1 year, but to give them the tools they need in a year to build up their bodies to be NBA bodies, because most rookies don't have NBA bodies coming out of NCAA. And so you give them a year of development, you see what they can be. Some players just right out the gate are immediately impact. Evan Mobley in Cleveland, Scotty Barnes. There's a long list of guys who are just they hit the NBA. There, who knows if these are. I don't think that'll be the case necessarily here, but they have the opportunity. So I don't think the Jazz are married long term to any of the players they picked up yet, other than to say they're very open minded. They would love to develop them into core pieces. You just have to see what Sexton is now after this injury. How can he fit into a team concept? Is he a starter or is he a six man? Is he basically the next Jordan Clarkson, which I think is a reasonable assumption, is that's the role that's best for him. In the meantime, you don't have a starting point guard unless you count Conley outside of Sexton. So Sexton should be getting those minutes and those opportunities. And so it's an exploratory time for the Jazz. It's an exciting time. And if you judge exclusively by win-loss, if you're a diehard fan of the Jazz, I mean, I think you're missing the point if you're just, our team sucks and da-da-da-da, all that. No, I mean, this is fun for me. I'm not a fan of any one team. I mean, I'm a fan of the league. I'm a fan of the process. Yeah. And I'm fascinated to see what Utah becomes. And, I want to see their games and see what they do. And there might be a point midway through the season, where, they want to make sure they don't win as much. So maybe Sexton or somebody sits down, Markkanen, and maybe they sit the last 20 games and it's a complete, crap fest for the bottom. And yeah, that won't be very watchable, but ultimately it's business in the NBA, and going after a franchise player in this next draft, it has a lot of appeal, I would think, to the Utah Jazz.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be a real ticking time bomb over the next few years to see how this Jazz develops. And obviously, what part of the change over the summer has been obviously the departure of Donovan Mitchell to the Cavaliers. And, he was in the same draft class as obviously Jared Allen. He worked with Ricky Rubio for several years at Utah. From a Donovan Mitchell standpoint, now he's in Cleveland. Do you think Mitchell's going to work well with the Cavaliers, with that connection with Allen, connection with Rubio from the draft and with Utah? Or do you think it may not click with Cleveland with Donovan Mitchell?
Oh, I mean, the previous connections are nice, and it's always good to have people you've either played with or that or you went through the same draft class. But ultimately, it's about how the team meshes on the court, how the pieces fit. Health is always a fact. It doesn't matter if you do everything right. If you're not healthy, it doesn't matter. I look at that team and I see an interesting combination where they have what, in a sense, to a degree, not perfectly, but what Utah didn't have, in that they have multiple bigs who defend. The Obviously Jared Allen is a very strong defender, but you've got this kid Evan Mobley who's really fantastic impact player at multiple positions, forward or center. I don't know about small forward, but he's switchable onto guards, and he doesn't need to score to impact the game. And if he's got an anchor behind him, in a lot of ways, he's kind of similar to AD in his prime. I'm obviously Mobley's not in his prime. I'm saying AD, who's been hurt the last couple of years. Imagine AD when he was healthy, and assuming he'll be healthy this year, when AD has an anchor behind him defensively, Davis is really a problem for other teams because he can get in passing lanes and switch onto guards, and it's that kind of support when you have a backcourt where, Darius Garland is not that big and Donovan Mitchell is not that big, right? So are you sort of replicating that issue because you've got a couple of 6'1" guards, give or take, in the backcourt? Well, now you don't have Rudy, but you have Jared Allen, who's, if he's 80% or 60% or even 50% of Rudy, I'm not going to judge that, but he's a reasonable facsimile of that. Plus you have Mobley, who I'm comparing, assuming he stays healthy and continues to grow in that kind of AD role. And then you've got a prospect in Isaac Okoro, who still hasn't necessarily shown that he's what he's going to be yet, but he could be that bigger wing defender that we talked about with Royce O'Neal, where they could have that kind of support. And I really think this team needs to either find out, do they have the pieces now, or are they one or two defensive pieces away? But I just think you've got the offense is taken care of. You've got Garland and you've got Donovan, and they're going to score. Plus, you've got enough help from the bigs to get, Mobley's going to get his points. You got LeVert off the bench, assuming he's off the bench. He could start at 3. I would personally want him off the bench with Okoro as a defender in the starting lineup. But again, it depends on how Okoro is developing. I think they could use another one or two big wing defenders. Who couldn't in this league use a couple of big wing defenders who can shoot the 3? That's, high value thing. But yeah, no, you have Kevin Love, you have Ricky Rubio, you got good veterans, you got some young, good mixture of youth and experience. I like the Cavs. I think I haven't ranked the East yet, but they're probably at least knocking on the top 4. I'd have to think about it really closely, but they're in that mix for a home, at least in my mind, without really doing the research. Don't hold me to that. In a few weeks, by the time this preseason starts, I'll really have a fix on what I predict. But I think that the Cavs are certainly in the mix for a top 4 seed in the East, which is impressive. And look, if you're a Jazz fan and you enjoyed Donovan's playing, I think you would wish him well and want him to succeed. I know some fans are going to hate on him just because he's not with their team anymore, and I get that. But I'm more of a let's have everyone succeed as best possible. One team's going to win in the end, anyway. But I'd like to see him have success. I'd love to see this rebuild have success. I'd love to see Gobert have some success in Minnesota. I don't know how that's going to work, but it has great potential. So I'm really curious to see I'm excited about this new season. I just can't wait to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, me as well. I'm really excited to see how the season starts and who sort of gets off the blocks the quickest first. Obviously, one of the big stories around the summer in terms of Utah Jazz and also linking to the Lakers is, of course, Russell Westbrook. Now, the latest that we're hearing is from the Athletic's Toby Jones, writing that league source indicating a market for Bogdanovic at the very least, with significant interest, of course, linking to a trade with the Russell Westbrook. However, there is still a deal involving Hield and Turner from the Pacers with Westbrook is now the question, though. So, in terms of Russell Westbrook, do you think if he comes to the Utah Jazz in a trade that involves Bogdanovic or Conley or both of them or a couple of other players, do you feel like there's an opportunity there for Westbrook to really be involved with that Jazz team and that Jazz rebuild as an experienced head? Or do you feel like Westbrook to the Jazz may be off the table?
I think if Westbrook were to go to the Jazz, in my mind, they'd probably buy him out and let him go play somewhere else. The reason I say that is I think that every win that they get is a potential chance of not getting a franchise player in this next draft. And Westbrook can raise your floor. He can take a adequate team and get them to 35 wins pretty relatively easily, in my opinion, because he is extremely talented still. And he plays hard all season. He doesn't do a lot of things well. He doesn't shoot well. He doesn't defend a lick. But he is. I don't think anyone's going to accuse him of not playing hard. I think from the Lakers' point of view, giving up future compensation. They only have LeBron and AD for 2 more years. Well, this season plus 2 more years, and both of them can opt out before that last year. And we don't know what's going to happen with LeBron's son, Bronny, and where he's going to go. And there's a chance that LeBron may go wherever his son goes, where it may not even matter if the Lakers are having success. He just may leave anyway. And so if they only have 2 more years, giving up a first or 2 firsts down the road really complicates their rebuild. While they are a free agent destination to an extent, I don't know if they have the appetite for really breaking their team down to nothing and being awful and playing what the Jazz are doing now. The Lakers have done. They did that after once Kobe got hurt in 2013, and they were bad for a while, and it took a long time to get to the LeBron era. And even the first year was pretty lousy with LeBron. So I don't think they have the stomach for that. So I think they're in an awkward position where they're not really committed to moving those picks without feeling like they have a real chance to win a title. And I don't think, looking at the Jazz roster, that they see those pieces as what puts them over the top, that puts them back into the top 4. I think Bogdanovich is helpful to them because he adds a shooter, and they need shooting badly. I don't think Conley helps them, but you could argue Conley was pretty awful in the playoffs. He's expensive. He's got money next year. I think that's, I think they would look at a trade in which they got salary. Like if they took Gay and his salary, if they took Conley and his salary, and let's say Clarkson and his salary, and let's say Bogdanovich, let's say this was like a 4-for-1, something crazy. I'm not saying this is going to happen. I'm just saying if the Lakers would look at it as like it's a money neutral deal, or they may even be saving the Jazz money and helping them clear their books, why are they the team responsible for giving up a first in a deal? Yeah. So that's the point of view that I understand it to be. Equally, I think of all the players that they have potential to get, I think Miles Turner is the most appealing to them as a fit that can improve them. But I don't think they view him as enough of an improvement to give up 2 firsts. And from what I understand, the Pacers are not ready to rebuild. They're telling teams, at least the people I talk to, that they're going to keep Turner and that they don't have an intention of rebuilding. Now, where do they look 20 games in? Are they 10-10? Are they 15-5? Or are the Pacers 4-16? If they're 4-16, that tune may change. And now they say, all right, well, we're probably not going to re-sign Turner. Let's move him. And then you're asking for a first for a guy who's basically in the last year of his contract, who isn't likely to extend because of the money. If he waits 6 months, he can get a 120% raise. If he extends immediately, he can only get a 5% raise, and I don't think he does that. And so if the Lakers were to give up 1 or 2 firsts to get Turner, they're getting a guy who might leave after a year that they can't reasonably extend right away. And so that's a huge risk, of which you might be to give up 2 firsts for Miles Turner who might leave in a year is insane. So I think there's some reluctance on the Lakers on either side of those deals because they feel like they're being taken advantage of, and that teams are leveraging the discomfort that they perceive with LeBron and Russ, and the Lakers have to win and all this. And they are. Those teams should take the Lakers to task. The Jazz should be trying to get a first out of the Lakers. They should be holding the line and saying the Lakers are going to get desperate enough, feel the pressure enough to win with LeBron that they're going to make a mistake and make a bad deal. Yeah. And that's Danny Ainge and that's Zanek's job, is to take advantage of another team. And look, you want to, if you talk to GMs, they're going to say, like, you want things to be win-win. You want both sides to be happy. You want both sides to be a little bit feeling like they didn't get the best out of the deal. That's usually the sign that it was a good deal, when both sides are unhappy. you don't want to necessarily destroy the other team because you have to do business with them for the next, however many years. However, when a team is vulnerable, you try to take advantage of them. And I think they should. And I don't know where the Lakers are going to fall in the end. It's a game of chicken.
Yeah.
There are two potential teams that I see. The Spurs also have a lot of cap room, so they could come into play for the Lakers, but the Lakers don't. Maybe if the Lakers could get Pirtle and I guess Josh Richardson, who, I think the Spurs would want to get out of Doug McDermott, but I think there's at least some potential there if the Lakers got Pirtle. And I don't know if the Lakers want Pirtle, if they view him as a fit, because he's not really a shooter. I know Turner is a shooter. Well, not a great shooter, but at least a willing shooter.
Yeah.
So I think all of these things are tied together. I don't know if we'll get resolution. Camps open up in the neighborhood of less than 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Teams tend to make, one or two minor, they certainly have to make roster decisions. The Jazz have too many players. You know what I mean? They have to get it down from 17 to 15. So the Jazz have to make decisions. The question is it going to be the simple decision of cutting a player that's guaranteed, that maybe they wouldn't want to, but maybe they feel like they have to? Or is it accepting a deal where maybe it's not as good of a trade as they want, but it gets them money off their books, and the Jazz are in the neighborhood of the luxury tax. They're not at the tax, but they're within a couple million of it, so or give or take. So it couldn't hurt for the Jazz to find a trade and clean up their books a little bit. But that doesn't mean you make a blockbuster trade for Russell Westbrook and get less than what the Jazz believe they should. So I'm fascinated to see how it resolves. I don't think we've seen the end here. Obviously, the Jazz will make some decisions because you can only carry 15 regular contracts, and they have 17 right now.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be a very much a watch this space kind of situation. I think the wait does continue on that one. Obviously, one of the most important part of the rebuild for the Utah Jazz is the brand new head coach, Will Hardy. He's a very much attention to detail coach. I think his experience learning from other people has accumulated to that. How do you see Will Hardy being as the head coach for the Utah Jazz? How do you see him as the man that could be taking this revolution forward?
Well, I don't know him well, but I've heard good things. I think he's well aware of what the job entails right now, which is he's the head coach. First opportunity to head coach a team usually comes with a bad team. Usually comes in a rebuilding thing. Usually it's going to make your first year's coaching record, probably your second year, who knows how long. It's not going to look great on your resume. And so his job is player development. I think he's going to value someone like Jared Vanderbilt, maybe Stanley Johnson if they can keep him, as guys who play hard and defend and play with energy and aren't scoring. It's not, the goal isn't me first. The goal is let's be a team. And I think those are two good team players. Stanley Johnson was a lottery pick not too long ago. Hasn't really found a fit. He's struggled a little bit. He's not a great shooter. I saw him in LA up close, and I thought he was a really good role player for the team. And I was actually surprised they let him go because they kind of need a bigger wing. He's not that tall. We talked about Royce O'Neal being 6'4". Stanley's like 6'6", but he plays bigger than 6'6" based on, he's physically extremely strong. Like he's very, very built. So it's not, I don't want to say it's an upgrade to O'Neal. O'Neal was a better shooter, but similar idea where, at least at 6'6", he can battle a Kawhi, he can battle a Paul George, and it's hard for anyone to battle LeBron individually, but I think Stanley, if he can make the team, which is, he's in that kind of fringe area where, there's just too many contracts, but I think that's the kind of vibe that Hardy's going to go for. Like he has to find what's the best role for, young veterans like Sexton, Markkanen, see what he can get out of, prospects still like Talen Horton-Tucker. Is there anything to discover that we haven't seen from Alexander Walker, Agbaji, the Kessler, all the young players that they brought in? That's his job is development. That's unlocking who they have, and it's not going to be measured, shouldn't be measured by win-loss, because I think there's going to be more loss than win by a large margin.
Yeah.
But it's, who are these players in November, and then who are the same players in February, in March? Have they developed? Are they learning? Are they understanding? And with that, are they holding their heads up and still playing hard even when they're losing? I can't speak to like his offensive defensive philosophies as much. I'm rookie coach. When you're an assistant, you tend to take on the characteristics of your previous head coach. So we'll see. I want to see what his identity is, and until you actually see a coach put into that experience, you don't really know. So I'm fascinated. I love seeing people succeed. Unfortunately, not everyone does. I'm hopeful here. Hopefully, he won't get blamed for the wins and losses, and people will be patient in what's a tough situation for any coach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure the Utah Jazz will hopefully give some patience to Will Hardy. Now, finally, then, this particular video, we're going to discuss everything to do with next year's draft going into the rebuild. Obviously, it's a long way away until the next draft. However, that is an important part for me in this rebuild. In terms of the positions that I've sort of picked out as to what they maybe need to be looking for in the draft next year, I sort of came up with center, power forward, and also point guard. Center because there is only two with Azubuike and Kessler, obviously. Power forward, they only have one out and out power forward, which is Vanderbilt, which is obviously he's going to be an unrestricted free agent in 2024. Mike Conley's future is up as a point guard and up in arms with obviously Sexton and Butler, who was a restricted free agent in 2023. Is a restricted free agent, sorry, in 2023. So when you look at the draft board, when you look at the different positions that I sort of picked out as potential options, for example, point guards, I had Scoot Henderson, Nick Smith. Power forwards, you have your Cameron Whitmores and your Gregory Jackson. And your centers, you've got Kellel Ware and Derek Lively II. Depends where Jazz are in the draft board, but would you agree with those positions that maybe needs looking for in the draft next year? Power forward, center, and point guard?
Knowing Danny Ainge and his influence, it's going to be the best player, regardless of position. It's not going to matter if that player, literally any position, they're going to pick the absolute best player. So if you get number one, I think most people believe it's Wembanyama. I can't quite say that right yet. Who's obviously a center. You can argue he has some power forward skills. He's 7'2". I personally worry about guys who are that tall, like Porzingis and Holmgren, and guys that tall tend to have a difficult time staying healthy, just because it's a tough game to play 82 games on when you're that big. Every so often you get someone like Shaquille O'Neal, who's kind of like a aberration, but even he struggled to stay healthy. There's another kid, Scoot Henderson, who's a guard, pretty much a combo guard. So these are probably the top two guys. You can go with wings. There's plenty of wings. Whitmore. You've got the Thompson twins. They're really talented. They're decent sized wings. You're just going to go with what's going to determine all this is their position, right? So if they're number one, that's a different point. If they're number two, different point. In theory, if it's determined that the top two guys are Scoot and Victor, then you're set. If you're number one, you take the one you like best, and if you're number two, you take whoever number one didn't take, right? It's where you get to three, assuming those are the clear twos, then it's a little bit more subjective, and you have to decide who's best for who's the best talent, period. But that's where we get to your question, is when you sort of when it gets closer to a tie, where it's like, we love both these kids. We've done all the research. We've talked to their families and all their coaches. Everyone loves them. They speak highly of them. Great work ethics. We've talked to all of the trainers, or the team attendance at college, or I guess with the overtime elite. We've done everything we can, and our group is very split on who we like. Like, it's we have 10 scouts, and 5 like this guy, 5 like that. Then maybe you start to say who's a better fit. I really feel like the fit has to come much later. I just don't think, especially on a team like this, where who has to be on the Jazz in 3 years? Like, who's a must? Right now, you can't say anybody. There's no one on this roster you could say this guy absolutely must be on the team in 3 years. Now that could be, Agbaji, or could be Kessler, it could be Sexton and Markkinen, it could be these guys, it could be Horton Tucker, could be. We have no idea. The Jazz have no idea. They know they would love for all of them to be so good that this team is the one. They just somehow miraculously landed into a championship team already, and more likely than not, that's not the case. So because there's no one player, like if you say, on the Cavs, who needs to be there in 3 years? Mobley needs to be there in 3 years. Garland needs to be there in 3 years. You look at any team with a superstar like a Ja Morant or a Giannis or a Luka, like those are real easy things. But Jazz don't have that luxury, which is why fit what? Who are you fitting with? You know what I mean? It's fitting with guys who won't be here. Maybe they will, but until you know who your cornerstone pieces are, you can't make any decision based on position. You got to go with raw, straight up talent, potential, and what you see that guy being in 3 to 4 or 5, 6, 7 years. Can this guy be a cornerstone piece? And kind of going back to our original points about getting more than one draft pick. That's the point, is that it's so hard to get it right that you want to get a lot of bites at the apple to get, if you're only right half the time and you have 10 picks, you should get 5 good players, right? But if you only have one shot at it, maybe you get one player, maybe you get 0 players, or if you get 2 players, maybe you get one. So, I think there's a lot of talent in this draft. I think the Jazz are in a good position to be awful, and they should focus on being awful. Unfortunately, I don't think the fans love that idea. And if you're a season ticket holder and you're going there and you're seeing a crappy team, I think it's going to be fascinating to watch for at least 50 games. The last 30 games may be really ugly, 20 games, whatever, where it could be just a bunch of injuries that are not serious injuries, but, let guys sit, stink it up, because these guys that we're talking about, some of these guys are really talented, and again, they're prospects, but they're high value prospects who could be something special down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to be a very interesting situation overall going forward for the next few years as well. Eric, thank you very, very much for coming on the show today. Much appreciated. And thanks for all your insights today as well.
Of course, happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. And thank you to you guys for watching the show as well. Please do like, comment, subscribe. The socials are below us on the screen and in the description down below the video. And for now, guys, I am the CHALL, your sporting journalist. Thank you very much. And that is full time.